Amina adjusted her seatbelt and took a deep breath, feeling a sense of pride as she settled into her first-class seat. It wasn't every day that she got to travel in luxury, and she had worked hard to afford it. The hum of the aircraft filled the cabin as passengers boarded, some chatting, others quietly finding their seats. A flight attendant passed by, offering a polite but noticeably forced smile. Minutes later, another flight attendant, a tall woman with sharp features, approached Amina's seat. "Excuse me, ma'am, I think you're in the wrong seat," she said, her tone laced with condescension. Amina frowned but remained calm. "No, I'm in the right seat. Here's my boarding pass." She handed it over, watching as the woman's expression shifted from suspicion to disbelief. The flight attendant hesitated, then forced a stiff smile. "One moment," she said before walking away. Amina could feel the tension in the air, but she brushed it off. She had every right to be there. What she didn't know was that this was just the beginning of an ordeal that would change everything. Amina could feel the eyes on her. Passengers in nearby seats stole glances, some curious, others indifferent. She had seen this look before, the unspoken question of whether she truly belonged in first class. She sighed, checking her phone as she waited for the plane to take off. Moments later, the same flight attendant returned, this time with a male supervisor. His uniform was crisp, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am," he said, voice firm, "I need to verify your ticket again." Amina raised an eyebrow. "I already showed it to her," she replied, gesturing toward the attendant. "We just need to double-check," the supervisor insisted. Amina handed over her boarding pass, her patience wearing thin. The man studied it, his jaw tightening. Then, without an apology, he handed it back. "Wait here." She watched as he and the flight attendant whispered to each other near the galley. Their glances toward her were anything but friendly. Her stomach twisted. Something wasn't right. Then the supervisor returned with 2 security personnel. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step off the plane," he said coldly. The cabin went silent. Amina's heart pounded. Amina's stomach dropped. The entire cabin had gone silent, all eyes now fixed on her. She could hear murmurs rippling through the rows of seats. Some passengers looked away awkwardly, while others leaned in, eager to witness the unfolding spectacle. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice steady despite the rising anger inside her. "I paid for this seat. I'm not going anywhere." The flight attendant folded her arms, a smug look on her face. The supervisor stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Ma'am, if you don't comply, we'll have to remove you by force." Amina gritted her teeth. "On what grounds?" "Disturbing the peace and failing to follow crew instructions," the supervisor replied flatly. Amina let out a bitter laugh. "The only thing I did was sit in my assigned seat." One of the security officers placed a hand on her arm. "Ma'am, please don't make this difficult." Passengers gasped as Amina stood her ground. "You're humiliating me for no reason. This is discrimination." But before she could protest further, she felt firm hands gripping her arms. The security officers yanked her from her seat. A chorus of gasps filled the cabin as Amina was forcibly removed. Amina's heart pounded as the security officers tightened their grip. She struggled, but their hold was firm. Gasps and whispers filled the cabin as passengers watched in shock. Some held up their phones, recording the scene, while others avoided eye contact, too afraid to speak up. "This is wrong," Amina shouted, her voice echoing through the aircraft. "I didn't do anything wrong." The flight attendant smirked as she stepped aside, allowing the officers to drag Amina toward the front of the plane. Her heels scraped against the floor as she resisted, refusing to go quietly. "You'll regret this," she warned, her voice shaking with both fury and humiliation. A little girl sitting in a nearby row turned to her mother. "Mommy, why are they taking her?" The mother pulled her daughter close and shook her head, unable to answer. Amina's breath came in short gasps as she was pulled through the narrow aisle. Just before reaching the exit, she turned her head. "You're all witnessing this. Don't stay silent," she pleaded. The moment she was forced out of the plane, the heavy door shut behind her. The cold airport air hit her face like a slap. A sense of deep injustice settled in her chest, but she wasn't going to let them win. Amina stumbled as the officers released her onto the cold tarmac. The roar of jet engines and the distant chatter of airport workers filled the air. She turned back to the plane, her heart pounding with rage and humiliation. Through the small oval windows, she saw passengers peering out, some with sympathy, others with indifference. Her hands clenched into fists. She had done nothing wrong, only demanded to be treated with respect. And for that, she was humiliated in front of dozens of people, treated like a criminal. An airline representative approached, a middle-aged man in a neatly pressed uniform. His expression was devoid of sympathy. "Ma'am, you are no longer welcome on this flight. You will need to make other travel arrangements." Amina scoffed. "Because I stood up for myself? This is discrimination and you know it." The man sighed impatiently. "You were removed for failing to comply with crew instructions." "That's a lie and you know it," she shot back. Nearby, a security officer shifted uncomfortably. Amina caught his hesitant gaze. He knew this wasn't right. She took a deep breath, calming her anger. If they thought she would let this slide, they were mistaken. As the plane remained grounded, she glanced around. An idea formed in her mind, one that would make them regret ever mistreating her. Amina took a deep breath, pushing aside her frustration. If they wanted to play dirty, she would fight back, smartly. She pulled out her phone and started recording. "To everyone watching," she said, her voice steady but firm, "I was just removed from this flight for no reason other than standing up for myself against discrimination. They want to brush this under the rug, but I won't let them." A few nearby passengers who had also been removed from the plane gathered around, listening. Some nodded in agreement, others hesitated, unsure of what to do. But Amina wasn't done. She quickly opened a browser and started researching airline policies and passenger rights. Then she found it, her golden ticket. Her flight, it turned out, could not legally take off with her checked luggage still on board. And per policy, the airline was required to retrieve it before departure. That process could take a long time. Smirking, Amina marched toward the nearest airport official. "I want my luggage off that plane. Now." The official hesitated. "Ma'am, that could take some time." "I don't care. I have a right to my belongings and that flight can't leave without removing them." The official's face paled as the realization dawned on him. He turned toward the flight crew in the distance, waving them over. Within minutes, frustration spread among the staff. Passengers inside the plane began to murmur as the delay continued. Amina watched, satisfied. They thought they could silence her, but now she was the one grounding the entire flight. As the minutes ticked by, the tension inside the airport grew. Passengers on board were starting to grow restless, some peering through the windows trying to understand why they were still grounded. Flight attendants whispered among themselves, glancing anxiously at the growing commotion outside. Amina stood firm at the gate, arms crossed, watching as the airline crew scrambled to address the situation. An airport supervisor approached her, his expression tight with frustration. "Miss, we're doing everything we can, but this is a complicated process. Please be patient," he said, forcing a polite tone. Amina raised an eyebrow. "Oh, now you're asking me to be patient? I asked for basic respect and you threw me off a plane. I'm simply exercising my passenger rights. Either you get my bags off or that plane doesn't move." Meanwhile, inside the aircraft, the passengers were getting irritated. A man in business attire called over a flight attendant. "What's the holdup? I have a meeting in 2 hours." A woman behind him sighed. "Yeah, what's going on? This is ridiculous." The flight attendants tried to calm them down, but the murmurs of discontent grew louder. One woman who had witnessed Amina's removal stood up. "This is about that girl, isn't it? The one you forced off? You all saw how she was treated." Another voice chimed in, "Yeah, and now we're paying for it." A storm was brewing and Amina knew it. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She had just turned the entire flight against the airline. Inside the aircraft, the murmurs of frustration turned into full-blown complaints. A businessman tapped furiously on his watch, muttering about missed appointments. A mother tried to soothe her crying child, glancing toward the flight attendants for an explanation. But no one had any real answers, only empty reassurances that the issue was being handled. Then a woman near the front stood up. "We all saw what happened," she said firmly. "That young woman was removed for no reason. Now the flight is grounded and none of us are being told why. She was standing up for herself," another passenger chimed in. "And now we're being punished for it?" A flight attendant, looking increasingly nervous, attempted to maintain control. "Please, everyone remain calm. We'll be taking off shortly." But that only made things worse. A man from the back shouted, "Not until you tell us the truth. We deserve to know why we're still here." Outside, Amina watched as airline staff whispered among themselves. She could see the nervous glances exchanged, the hurried phone calls. They weren't just dealing with her anymore, they had a full plane of angry passengers to contend with. A supervisor approached her again, his tone noticeably less dismissive. "Miss, can we speak privately?" Amina smirked. "Now you want to talk?" The balance of power was shifting. And she wasn't backing down. Would you like to continue with Chapter 9? Inside the airport, chaos was brewing. Airline executives were alerted that Flight 237 was still on the ground, and now passengers were becoming restless. Social media had already started buzzing. Several passengers had recorded videos of Amina's removal, and the footage was spreading fast. Back inside the plane, a supervisor arrived, attempting to ease the growing tension. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We are working to resolve a minor issue, and we appreciate your patience. But the passengers weren't buying it. Minor issue? A woman scoffed. You humiliated a paying passenger and threw her off the plane for no reason. Another man raised his phone. We've already posted the video online. People are demanding answers. The flight attendants exchanged nervous glances. They could feel the tide turning. Meanwhile, outside, Amina was still at the gate, standing tall as a team of airport officials discussed the situation. They had tried to silence her, but instead they had triggered something much bigger. A manager approached her, forcing a smile. Miss, perhaps we can offer you a free flight credit and resolve this quietly. Amina crossed her arms. I don't want a flight credit. I want accountability. The airline was running out of options. And she knew it. As Amina stood her ground, the online world erupted. The videos of her removal had already gone viral, racking up thousands of views in minutes. The hashtag Justice for Amina was trending, and users were tagging the airline's official accounts, demanding answers. Inside the airport, a group of passengers who had witnessed the event started speaking up. One woman, still furious, marched up to the airline staff at the gate. You don't just get to remove someone because it makes you uncomfortable. That's not how this works. Another man added, this airline better make this right, or they're going to have a PR nightmare. The airline's PR team was already in crisis mode. Calls flooded in from news agencies, reporters asking about the incident. The CEO was alerted, demanding immediate damage control. Meanwhile, Amina wasn't just waiting, she was taking action. She called a well-known civil rights lawyer, explaining the situation. They threw me off for no reason, she said, her voice steady but filled with determination. You're not just going to fight this, the lawyer responded. You're going to set a precedent. Amina looked toward the plane, still grounded. The airline had no idea how much trouble they were in. Inside the airline's crisis management office, tension ran high. The PR team huddled around a large screen displaying social media posts, news headlines, and a rapidly growing petition demanding justice for Amina. Calls from journalists flooded in, and emails from angry customers clogged their inbox. We need to issue a statement, one executive said urgently. Not yet, the PR director responded. We don't even know how to spin this. If we admit fault, we could face legal action. Meanwhile, on the tarmac, the plane was still grounded. The airline had to complete an internal review before allowing the flight to continue. Passengers inside grew impatient, and whispers of frustration filled the cabin. This is ridiculous, a man grumbled. They threw that woman off the plane and now we're all stuck? Serves them right, another woman muttered. They need to answer for what they did. Back in the terminal, Amina's phone buzzed with notifications. Her lawyer had already sent a formal legal notice to the airline, demanding an explanation. News crews began arriving, eager for an interview. Amina knew she had the upper hand now. The airline thought they could silence her, but instead they had given her the biggest platform possible. As the minutes stretched into hours, frustration among passengers turned into outright anger. Some took to social media, live-streaming their experiences. Videos of Amina being removed had already gone viral, but now new footage surfaced. Clips of passengers arguing with flight attendants demanding answers. The hashtag Justice for Amina was trending worldwide. Celebrities, activists, and even politicians weighed in, calling for accountability. The airline's stock plummeted as investors panicked over the growing PR disaster. Inside the airport, reporters swarmed Amina. How do you feel about the airline's actions? One asked, shoving a microphone toward her. Amina took a deep breath. I stood up for myself and they tried to silence me. But now the whole world is watching. This isn't just about me, it's about every person who has ever faced discrimination and been told to stay quiet. The crowd around her erupted in applause. Her words resonated with everyone who had ever been mistreated. Meanwhile, inside the airline's headquarters, executives were in full damage control mode. If we don't handle this properly, we could be looking at lawsuits, boycotts. Our entire reputation is on the line, the CEO snapped. But Amina wasn't done yet. She had one more move to make. one that would force the airline to face the consequences of their actions. Amina sat in a quiet corner of the airport, her phone buzzing non-stop with messages of support. But she wasn't just reading comments, she was taking action. With a determined expression, she dialed the number of a well-known civil rights lawyer, Maya Collins, who had already reached out after seeing the viral video. "Amina, I've reviewed the footage," Maya said firmly. "The airline violated your rights. We have grounds for a lawsuit: discrimination, wrongful removal, emotional distress. And with the evidence we have, they won't be able to sweep this under the rug." Amina felt a fire ignite inside her. "I don't just want an apology. I want real change." Maya agreed. "We'll hit them where it hurts, legally and financially. The airline needs to answer for this." At the same time, the airline's executives were scrambling. The CEO paced inside the boardroom, glaring at his team. "We need to make this go away before it turns into a legal nightmare. Offer her compensation, issue a vague apology, do whatever it takes." But Amina wasn't backing down. With Maya's legal team behind her and the public rallying for justice, the airline's problems were only beginning. The airline executives knew they were in trouble. With the video of Amina's removal still spreading, calls for accountability were growing louder. Passengers were threatening boycotts, activists were demanding justice, and legal experts were dissecting every second of the footage. "We need to control the narrative," one executive said, rubbing his temples. "If we don't act fast, this lawsuit could cost us millions." In a rushed attempt to salvage their reputation, the airline issued a public statement. It was filled with corporate jargon. "We regret any misunderstanding, we value all customers, we are committed to diversity." But there was no real apology, no mention of wrongdoing. Amina read the statement and scoffed. "They think this is enough?" she muttered to Maya, her lawyer. "They're not even acknowledging what they did." Maya smirked. "That's exactly what we wanted. Their weak response will only fuel public outrage." Sure enough, social media exploded. Celebrities, activists, and journalists criticized the airline's statement, demanding accountability. Protesters gathered outside their headquarters, holding signs that read "Justice for Amina" and "End Airline Discrimination." The pressure was mounting, but the airline still had one more move to make, one that would change everything. The airline, now in full damage control mode, made a last-ditch effort to silence the growing backlash. They offered Amina a private settlement, an undisclosed sum in exchange for her silence. A meeting was arranged, and Amina sat across from their legal team, Maya by her side. "This is a generous offer," one of the lawyers said, sliding a thick contract across the table. "It would be in your best interest to put this behind you." Amina glanced at the document but didn't touch it. "So you think money will erase what happened? That it will make up for the humiliation, the discrimination?" The lawyer hesitated. "We're simply trying to resolve this amicably." Maya leaned forward, her voice firm. "If you really wanted to resolve this, you would issue a public apology, fire the employees responsible, and implement real policy changes." The room went silent. The airline's representatives shifted uncomfortably, realizing their plan wasn't working. Amina stood. "I don't want your money. I want justice." She looked each of them in the eye. "And trust me, this fight isn't over." As she walked out, the airline's executives knew they had just lost control of the situation for good.